Man, some songs are just blessed. Seriously, it just seems like certain songs are touched by the hand of God, where the miraculous and unexplained occurs. That's exactly what today's song was, and still is. It was a mind-blowing song in 1985 going into 86, and it didn't sound like anything on the radio. It was just meant to be. Today's singer and writer tells us how he was mentored by both Paul Simon and David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. In fact, David Gilmour produced today's hit song, and the real magic happened when they were in the studio and turned down every instrument in the chorus except for the vocals. And they both looked at each other, and they knew it would be a smash. They knew they had something special. It would become one of the most nostalgic and haunting songs of the 80s. And even more incredible, he wrote it on his dead hero's guitar. This interview is mind-blowing, and it shows the true power of music and why we've all lost something in all the technology and the mathematical approach to music that we're in. One of the best rock storytellers I've ever witnessed is truly. This interview is a beautiful example of the magical muse that transpires when a song is born and raised in greatness. It's coming up on Professor Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember Bubble Tape, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the white button and the bell, and also check out our podcast on Spotify and Apple. Click here or click there. So it's time for another edition of our show, Revelations, where featured artists take you for a deep dive behind the greatest songs and greatest albums in history. In 1985, the Dream Academy released one of the greatest songs of that year going into 86. A Life in a Northern Town. Life in a northern town. Lead singer and songwriter Nick Laird Clowes told me the story of how this magical song transpired and the meaning behind the poetic lyrics, and how David Gilmour of Pink Floyd and Paul Simon helped him to reach his full potential. I'm telling you, this interview blew my mind, and I guarantee you it will blow yours. You'll be fascinated. Here it is.
We begged our parents to take us to see the Beatles play at Hammersmith Odeon, and the Yardbirds opened for them. So it was like, oh my God, it's the Yardbirds. That sparked it, and I was sold then. School, I was just one of those people, it just didn't work for me. I really was getting all my information from those 45, those 2.5-minute records.
But it's like Springsteen said, we learn more from a 3-minute record than we ever learned in school, and that's so right.
I was always going into my local record shop. The guy was a guitarist, and he said, you should actually listen to this. Save your money for what you're about to buy. And he put me in the booth, and I heard something that blew my mind. I came out, what is it? He said, Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan. She aches just like a woman. And he said, this is the gold standard. And he offered to start teaching me to play guitar. That summer was the Isle of Wight Pop Festival. My parents said, you're not going. I said to my sister, I'm going. She bought a ticket, got on a train, hardly any money. We get there, and the first thing we see is the Doors, and Jim comes on, and it's like, whoa. That it would be untrue. But my life had changed.
Let's talk about Live in a Northern Town. Haunting song, international smash. Live in a Northern Town. It's just a colorful evocateur for the theater of the mind. It's one of those songs in the 80s that to me is like trance-like. Like when I would hear it, it would just whisk me away to a totally different dimension. And that's what you want from music, that kind of magic.
You're right.
Yeah, dedicated to the memory of the late Nick Drake, an elegy for Nick Drake, but it wasn't written about Nick.
Okay, wait. So I got to set it up, because what happened was things had been going pretty badly. The Northeast was in bad trouble. The shipyards were empty. I found it very, very distressing to actually see the results of what was going on. In the bubble in London, you didn't see it. Gilbert calls me and he says, why don't we try something folk? And then we start talking, why don't we try something with African style chorus? And he had a guitar, a nylon string guitar with only 3 strings. And he sat opposite me, and I sat with that little guitar I have that was on the cover of Nick Drake's Bride to Later. And I started playing something, and he started going, well, how about that? And I was like this. And then suddenly he just started moving from the E, bottom E up to the A, just moving one note to another as I played this arpeggio thing against it. Suddenly we're like in this world. And then we started trying to do this chant, this African chant thing. That night, as usual, parents went to bed, and I sat down with my guitar here, my little cassette machine there in front of the TV, and I just started playing through the thing from the day. And I couldn't remember any of the things about the African chorus, so I did something a bit like something I'd done in the act. Hey, mum, mum, I started doing this mum, mum thing, and I wrote 2 verses. Salvation Army band played, and the children dropped. I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning. I wrote the third verse. Evening turned to rain. Watch the water roll. The next day, I think I went first to see Gilbert and played it. And he said, well, that's not how the chorus went. I said, I know, but that's how the chorus gets. I couldn't remember that, and I can remember this. So that was it. And then my northern lyrics came about through the tough time in Newcastle. And all those things went into the song, and then Kate playing against it. And when Gilbert went back on keyboards, a world opened up. What was extraordinary is that song came about from a profoundly dark place, but it completely changed all our lives. And out of the darkness shone this thing. And actually, it's uplifting to people, which is fantastic. Like a lot of sad music comes from a sad place. My guitar's at home, but I could go, hey, oh, mama, hey, oh, mama, hey, life in a northern town.
Well, so when you were coming up with that, I mean, this was before Graceland.
She's a rich girl. She don't try.
Where did the idea come of putting that into a pop song?
I was starting to think like Monday.
Monday.
Started to realize in the act went, hey, mama, 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 the love in my life, I like it, surefire. I think that got me into this mum thing. Anyway, I don't know, but I saw that. And the thing is, once I sang it, and I sang it to the others, they put these easy harmonies on it. And suddenly, you've got this big thing. We go in the studio, and he starts bulking up the harmonies and tracking them. He was called George Nicholson, and he started tracking up these harmonies. And I came in and heard them. You remember, I said I was a nightmare in the studio. So I came out here and I said, I don't want to sound like the New Seekers, man. We live in a world of our own. And he said nothing. He just picked up his bag and he walked out of the studio. And everyone went, great, you've done it again. No one's going to work with us. What are we going to do now? We've got half the vocals done. So I just said, we'll keep on going the way he was doing it. Let's just bulk up the vocals again, and then we've got it. So he was right. He made them sound big and triple tracked. 6 months later, 9 months later, when I'm in the studio with David Gilmour, we're doing the thing where I'm sitting at the mixing desk. He's in the middle. Andrew Jack's the engineer's on the other side. I've got my faders with the screams and the guitar here. And we get to the end and it just goes round and round. And I just said, drop all the music out. And David, he never would say if he didn't think it was a good idea. He went, absolutely. All right, now we just bring in the drums. Hey, oh, ma. And that turned out to be gold later when Dario G did it, because when it was sampled, they said they listened all the way through to the song to praying that there would be a moment where the music dropped out so they could sample the vocals. That was a fantastic thing. So again, that was extremely lucky.
Live in Northern Town was not the original title for the song.
No, it was The Morning Lasted All Day. So what happened between the act and the Dream Academy is I went to New York with my girlfriend. The Grammy Awards were happening, and she knew someone that got her a ticket for the Grammys who was partly organizing it. And they said, would your boyfriend be able to assist Paul Simon? I mean, he's hosting it. I definitely would. That night, after it all ended, we went to dinner, and he finally turned to me and he said, what do you do? I said, I'm a singer-songwriter. He went, really? And I said, well, I made this album, The Act, with my band. And he said, well, come and play it to me tomorrow. And he really listened to the record, and he said, I think I could teach you things that have taken me 20 years to learn. It was amazing because, like all good teachers, he was tough. But we stayed in touch. As I formed the Dream Academy, he started coming through London, and I played him my track, Life in a Northern Town, called The Morning Lasted All Day without the words Life in a Northern Town in it. I got in Paul's car to go back to my house. He was going to drop me off. And he said, that song's good. What are you going to call it? And I said, The Morning Lasted All Day.
And the morning lasted all day.
I said, what are people going to go in and they're going to say, can I have that Hey Mama thing? That's not good. You need a title. And I said, what about Life in a Northern Town? He said, that's a great title. I just went in on my own and I started overdubbing over the finished mix, which is why, as Lenny Waronker always says, the song's got all these misty sound to it because it's been so overdubbed. You know, it's been overdubbed over the mixes, you've overdubbed over that at least once. So, and Life in a Northern Town it became.
Life in a northern town.
Feels like a poem. The Salvation Army Band played.
The Salvation Army band played.
So that opening line, I just felt I was somewhere where I needed to be, and it felt really right with the chords.
Through an open window came, like Sinatra in a young...
When I got onto the second thing, I just think that in 1963, we had one of the worst winters since the war.
He said in winter 1963.
In London, we had to go down to a pipe in the middle of the road, at the end of the road, and just get water out of the frozen ground, and all the neighbors did too. And that's where we were. But it was the year the Beatles happened, and then later on, it was the year where JFK died.
John F. Kennedy and the Beatles.
And suddenly I was in that, and I just thought, I'm going to mention these people and this thing. And when I played it to my sister, she said, the pipe at the end of the road. I said, yeah, right, you got it.
It felt like the world would freeze.
And I think I was thinking of the character being through an open window came, like Sinatra in a younger day.
Like Sinatra in a younger day. Pushing.
And, you know, in those days, everybody did take a cigarette out, and they did tell you about things.
And he took a cigarette out. And everyone.
When I was 12, 13, we relied on these older music fans who would tell us about how things had been, you know, and it was a world we wanted to be part of, you know.
When you say in the morning lasted all day and then repeat that all day, oh.
Lasted all day.
Love how you captured that. Sinatra and the Beatles in the same song. And it also speaks to the different generations so perfect without coming out and saying it, you know. Sinatra in a younger day is the greatest generation, right? The 40s. And you're going into baby boomers. with the Beatles in that moment that basically healed the country after JFK had been assassinated. And then in verse 2, the lyric presents just another interesting portrayal. They sat on the stony ground and he took a cigarette out, like you said, and everyone else came down to listen. You're talking about that guy telling the story, right?
Came down to listen.
All those guys that you knew who always told you, just like you have about from Sinatra to the baby boomers and the healing after JFK. You know, this is our history. It's our oral history.
Well, and then the evening turned to rain. Watch the water roll down the drain as we followed him down to the station.
We followed him down to the station.
He never would wave goodbye. You could see it written in his eyes as the train rolled out of sight. Bye-bye.
No, he never would wave goodbye.
That's just such a brilliant way to end the song.
It just came through. And then, of course, I just put the diminished chord that I'd learned from Paul or from my lessons, and I put that in. And then I just thought, it's a little Beatle reference.
So many.
And then Kate, woo, the train, you know, woo, bye, bye. And double the bars there just before coming in. That was a little production idea. Not the bye bye, but you know.
I've read that it took a year to record the song, as you've kind of told me about it. And then, of course, David Gilmour coming in.
Went to see him, and I said, I'm forming a new band, a new wave band, The Act. And he said, if you need a guitarist, you should really check my brother out. After 6 months, I just had a drummer. It was just me and the drummer. So I went, you know what? I'd love to try your brother. So his brother, David's brother, Mark, was in The Act. When The Act split up, I played some songs to David, who I now knew quite a lot better. When he heard Northern Town, he said, this is the best thing you've ever done. If you want me to help you on some of the demos and things, I'll help you. You can use my studio. And he said, you produce it the way you always produce your things. You bring it to me, and then I'll tell you what I think could be better. And then we'll work on that, and then we'll mix it together. He said, that was like gold to my ears, music. The one thing David Gilmour had told me when I was in The Act was, your music will be as good as it can be due to the amount that you go with what you believe in. And the amount that you allow the engineer or the producer in the studio to change your vision is the amount that it will be less good. And then David came and said, I think we could put real strings on this, or why don't we bring a percussionist in? So it was a brilliant way of working.
No, we never would wave goodbye.
What was kind of the final thing there where David came in, where you had produced the whole thing? What helped you know you were finished?
When we got to the John F. Kennedy and the Beatles bit, I had my screams and I pushed them up really loud. And he had been pushing up the drums really loud, so I was like echoing him. And he just turned to me and he mouthed an expletive to say, you bastard, And we got in the car and we listened to it and he went, that's great. When he heard that and said to me, it's perfect, and I totally agreed, we were done. And then we released it, before we released the album. We released it in England a year before it came out in America, climbed the British charts. It peaked at 15. It didn't peak so high as in America. And then it was a hit all over Europe. And so we went back in, finished the album, and then a year later, it came out in America. And we were the MTV generation. It was for us. We loved films. We loved Super 8. We met Peter Kagan and Paula Greif. They were film students. We made Super 8 style films with them. we loved making our videos. We didn't want to make some kind of crappy advert. We wanted to make art films, So it was fantastic.
Now, Nick Drake, he died in 74, but his music just left an indelible impression on so many. The acoustic guitar arrangement in Live in Northern Town was performed on the same guitar that Nick posed with on the cover. The rumor is that you paid £100 for the guitar.
I loved Nick Drake, and I particularly loved Brighter Later.
Hey, slow Jane makes sense.
Jeff Dexter, who'd been my manager with the Alfalfa, my first band, Jeff said to me, I know where that guitar is. It belongs to the photographer. It's not Nick's guitar. It belongs to the photographer, Nigel Weymouth, who took the photo. And I think he wants to sell it. I spent that summer working in the RCA record factory, packing records. I was 15. And to get enough money to buy a Martin. And when I got my £200, Jeff said to me, Nigel wants to sell the guitar for £100 and it's got the original case. I said, I'll have it. He told me, actually, this wasn't Nick Drake's guitar. And I said, yeah. He said, well, actually, this guitar was Eric Clapton's. He said, when Clapton formed Cream, he was living in a place in the King's Road called the Pheasantry, a very cool apartment. But he was moving on to bigger and better things, and he gave up his apartment, his famous apartment in the King's Road. And Nigel Weymouth, who had a shop called Granny Takes a Trip, which is a legendary shop. Nigel Weymouth moved in to Eric's apartment. And when he was in there, everything was gone, but he opened a cupboard, and in there was a brown guitar. And he called up Eric's guitar man and said, Eric's left a guitar here. And he heard Eric shout, what's it look like? And he said, it's a Guild and it's brown wood. And he said, tell him he can keep it. So Nigel Weymouth kept it. Nick Drake was legendarily shy, hated having his picture taken. So he always got that guitar, and it was like something that he could hold, and he loved that guitar, and he played it, and they took the pictures. Now that acoustic guitar, I wish I had it here, but I'm not in my place is just around the corner. You want to wait and I'll go and get it? That acoustic guitar has got high strings on it. And the reason they're on it is because when Paul Simon came here to do Graceland, he played at the Albert Hall, and there was a party afterwards, and I said, wow, the guitar. And he said, yeah, I couldn't get my acoustic guitar sound through the African music. And then I cracked it. I did this high string, which is Nashville tuning, which is a Nashville thing where you just have these octave strings. And I said, what are they? And being Paul, he stood against the wall in the middle of this big party, and he wrote down top E, 0.10, bottom E, 0. And he said, and that G has to be the octave, And I went away and I put them on the guitar, and they've been on ever since.
What are your thoughts so many decades later, your final thoughts?
It changed my life, but every time I hear it, I feel I got everything right on it. And to me, it always hits me cuts me to the core. I love it.
Hey, make sure to leave us a comment about this magical song from 1985. What is your take on the lyrics? What memories are associated with this beautiful song? Down below, let's have a great discussion. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.